The National Archives of Australia is the federal agency that collects the records of Australian government organisations. The Archives holds over 40 million records in every format, with over 1 million audio-visual materials, including films, film sound, video and audio tapes, and digital media. We preserve these audio-visual records to connect Australians with the nation's history, culture, identity, and our collective memory.
I declare open the Olympic Games of Melbourne.
Preserving audio-visual formats is a complex task. At a high level, there are 3 phases: cataloguing and preparation, treatment and digitisation, and access and long-term planning. These can be separated into distinct steps. In this video, we'll show you some of our processes for treating and digitising audio-visual records in all formats. Our aim is to digitise all the physical formats in our archives, but because this takes time, we have to make sure they're stored in environmental conditions that slow deterioration. Audio-visual formats are susceptible to physical decay due to the very materials and chemicals used in their manufacture. However, poor storage conditions such as high temperature and high humidity will accelerate this process. We store our motion picture films and sound films in specially designed cold vaults where the temperature and humidity are constantly controlled. Video and audio are stored in cool conditions. Maintaining optimal storage conditions and tracking the location of a collection this size requires specialist tools and skills. So let's meet some of the people who work with these audio-visual materials to find out how they conserve our physical items, convert them to digital files, and preserve them for the future.
Cataloguing is entering the descriptive information about the record. So when items arrive here, we ensure that the catalogue record and that the descriptions are complete. So that's the titles and different versions, different dates associated with when they were recorded or broadcast, different copies of the items, and making sure that the relationships between the items that we have in the database are accurate and relate to the correct title information. So that's all the work that we do through the cataloguing process that then informs our preservation work that we do.
So our team catalogues metadata into an asset management system called MediaFlex for the sole purpose of it being retrievable, searchable in the system. And it helps to support for the future preservation work for the digitizers to know what we're digitizing, and for, once it's digitized, for it to be searchable in a database for the general public to view.
Our asset management here at the National Archives is a MediaFlex product. It's a commercial off-the-shelf system. It performs a range of functions. It's our collection database, so it holds all the intellectual information regarding the items in our collection. It also manages the physical control of those items, so the location, and records any of the movements in and out of storage to vendors, to various other departments within the archives. And the other main role it does is it has a series of automated workflows that manage the digital collection. So that does everything from the ingest of files, movement to different storage systems, creating and validating checksums to ensure the integrity of the files, extracting metadata, and can also launch external workflows to do things like transcode to other formats or automated QC processes.
We deal with film that comes in from a variety of government agencies, and a lot of it can be audiovisual material. And because of the storage conditions that the film might have been kept in before it gets to the National Archives, it can already be highly deteriorated. Until someone physically looks at it, we really don't know what we're in for.
My job is to prepare the films for digitisation, which means taking an old film and getting it to a point where it's clean and smooth and will travel through the digitisation machine, the scanner, very easily. The idea is to handle the films as little as possible. Once I'm winding the film through, I can feel any little bump or scratch. We often come across films that have some sprocket damage. There can be adhesive residue that needs to be cleaned off or chinograph marks from the editing process. There's a lot of buckle and weave here. The film doesn't sit flat when it's held loosely between the two spools. So there's a twist and then there's this quite strong buckle here. And they need to be wound very tightly so that they run very smoothly through the machine. The majority of our collection here is acetate stock. As it starts to break down, it releases acetic acid, otherwise known as vinegar syndrome. As a film ages, if it's not stored correctly, the gas will be released. So I'd put in an AD strip, which is a pH reading, and leave it for 24 hours. When I reopen the can, if it's definitely a 2 to 3, then I would put it in the fume hood and off gas for a period of 2 to 3 days before I work on it.
Preservation can be done on the physical item to a certain extent, but the very best way of preserving it for us is to digitise it and to try and create an accurate copy of that record. When I get it, I put it on what I deem to be the best scanner for that particular film item. The laser graphics itself is capable of running 8mm, 16mm and 35mm and all the sound formats. So it's a very versatile machine and it scans at 5.1K, which is very high resolution. The machine will then scan each frame individually and create a separate file for every single frame containing all of the colour information as well as the frame area and the surrounding area. So if there's soundtrack, it will store that as well. All of that information is being kept on our main storage unit and then everything is being archived from that point. We use DPX as our master format. We end up with master files, duplication files and access files, and the laser graphics will make those files at the same time so that the film only needs to be run once. Every item in our collection is barcoded, and the barcodes are also important for our MediaFlex system.
We have over 70,000 film sound components in the National Archives collection. Film sound is the synchronised audio component for the imagery on a motion picture film or television show. We have both magnetic and optical formats, the majority of which are magnetic, and we have various gauges, 16mm, 17.5mm and 35mm. And we're copying the final mixes and music and effects mixes. We would vinegar test the film if it's an acetate base. Then we would examine for any other deterioration, a state of the oxide, whether it's powdery. We would be looking for any other damage on the film, like sprocket damage, cuts or tears, or splices, and whether they need remediation work. We would also assess whether the film requires any cleaning. So if there is oxide shedding or dirt, we would clean those films as required. Blocking is one of the more severe forms of deterioration we would get with acetate film that's suffering vinegar syndrome. It's getting towards the end stages of the vinegar syndrome cycle, where the film has basically fused into a solid block. Some of these films with a lot of care can be unblocked, so we would do unblocking as a last resort if that was the only component available for that film. When we're copying, we do everything in real time. So if the film is half an hour long, it takes half an hour to copy, and we're monitoring the audio content as we're copying for quality. So once we've captured the digital file, that goes on to the next step of moving into our digital archive. MediaFlex takes over the last stage of that process, where copies are made and ingested into the digital archive. The film is recanned if required, and then wound to a preservation standard and sent for long-term storage in our temperature and humidity control vaults. So one of the challenges we have when dealing with old analogue formats is obsolescence. If you have material and you don't have the equipment to play back that material, the first priority would be able to store that material in the best conditions possible until a time comes that you can either source machines to play that back, or you find somebody that can do it for you.
The biggest problem we have here is obsolescence. A lot of these players haven't been made for 40 to 50 years. Upstairs, I've probably got about 200 machines, including parts that we have stripped down from old players that are no longer any use. And it's not only the VCRs, but actually having people to actually come in and fix the machines when there is a problem. We're very lucky here. We've got an engineer who is really good.
So what happens over a period of time with heat, the ICs can actually start creeping out of their sockets. And once that happens, you end up with a lot of intermittent problems. So there'd only be a handful of us these days, probably around the country, maybe about 10. And they're all a similar vintage. You know, grew up with the machines, all the systems and stuff like that. And unfortunately, it takes an old techo to fix old gear. There we go.
I'm worried about the future because there's no one being taught this trade anymore. So once these engineers go, there's no one left to fix the machines. With video, there's so many formats out there, the oldest being what we call half-inch. They started off in the 70s, and they're both digital and analogue. Some had cartridges, some had reel-to-reels. And then there's a whole new different world of formats when HD come around. So the first thing I do is check every title, make sure that it's a tape that actually does need to be copied. One of the most important parts of preparation before copying a tape is the cleaning. The cleaning machines we have here work by running the tape across a cleaning material, and another benefit of cleaning the tapes this way is that they repack the tape so that the tapes are ready to put in the machine and record. But one of the biggest problems we have here is hydrolysis. Hydrolysis is where the tape absorbs moisture from the atmosphere and it causes the tape to become sticky. We actually put it into a clinical oven, which is set at a very low temperature, 48 to 50 degrees, and it draws the moisture out slowly without doing any damage to the rest of the tape or its mechanism. With older players, before recording a tape, we actually perform a hang clean on the heads and some of the rollers and components of the machine. This is because tapes are old and the cleaners don't get everything, and it's a good way of making sure we get the best quality picture. When we're ready to transfer, there's a number of things we do for different formats. For some formats we have to set the tracking, which is the actual heads on the tape, make sure it's in the centre. Others we set the luminance, which is the brightness of the tape, and also the volumes. It's not our job to enhance a tape. It's to get it how it looked when it was originally made. Whilst digitising the tapes, we monitor the tapes for any damage. We're looking for things like dropouts, creases, or any video or audio disturbances. We enter this information into our database. Also, in some cases, we're the only people to ever actually see the tape, so we do take note of what the content is so that we can record it in a synopsis.
The audio collection here is around 240,000 items. Around 170,000 are magnetic media. All up, there may be 15 or 20 formats. That's mostly reel-to-reel tape and cassettes and so forth. They're the most problematic ones because they suffer from degradation. They can get sticky. They don't play properly. They can shed as you play them, and so for items in poor condition we'll look at. Other times we look at the content. If the significant content is in good condition, it'll probably last longer, so that can wait. So it's a bit of a balancing act. When I have a tape to transfer, the first step is assessing the physical condition of the tape. We want to make sure that it's in a good enough condition for playback, because you can actually damage the tape just by putting it on the machine. For example, the tape may stretch or break, or there may be oxide flaking off the tape. We'll assess its track format and speed and so forth to make sure we've got the right playback machine. Oftentimes we'll need to repair parts of the tape. For example, old splices where the tape has been edited together may be coming undone. We'll need to redo those. Tape transfers are done in real time, a one-to-one speed. High-speed dubbing can be done. The problem with it is the quality suffers. As an archive, we are intending to preserve the contents of the tape exactly as it is. We're primarily listening for the technical quality of the audio, make sure there's no distortion or hum or hiss, keeping an eye on the tape to make sure the tape isn't stretching or there's no break or things to repair. But we're also listening to the content. Many of these tapes were recorded decades ago, and we may be the first ones to be listening to those tapes since the original recording. We make notes in our database about the content. It could be a simple note like the date it was recorded or who the interviewee was. Sometimes we stumble across things that aren't noted in the documentation, and we complete that information in the database just to make sure things can be found that may not be noted elsewhere. So we digitise, make sure it's safe, the file goes into storage, and then we don't need to come back to that particular item.
With the digital collection, one of the main features of MediaFlex is it manages all of that digital content. So it moves files throughout our storage systems. We have an object store system here in the Sydney office, which is also replicated in our Canberra office. We also make 2 copies of every file on LTO tape here in the Sydney office. Those LTO tapes come out and get stored in separate locations. Keeping multiple copies in different geographic locations and also on different technologies is part of our disaster recovery planning. Once you've created the digital content, the process doesn't stop there. Digital preservation is an ongoing process. You need to maintain the integrity of this collection and often migrate it to new formats and new storage systems as time goes on and technologies evolve.
We've only been able to show you a small part of what we do at the National Archives of Australia. Not all of our work is done here. We also outsource some of our work to approved companies so we can increase the amount we're able to do every year. Our aim is to make our collection accessible to the public so that these audiovisual treasures, the raw material of our history, will be available to Australia and the world in the future. The images, sounds and stories of the past will play a vital part in telling the stories of tomorrow.
One of the biggest satisfactions I have with my job is knowing that I'm recording part of Australia's history.